Muted. That's fine. No, I'm happy to be muted, but I can't hear anything. Is it?
Buenas tardes,
Good afternoon, friends.
que todos los amigos tengan sus micrófonos cerrados.
Please turn off the microphones and please turn them on when you are given the floor. This is a message to all our friends. If you face any difficulty during the broadcasting, please exit the room and just listen to your respective language. And the bottom of the screen you can choose your language, or in any case if you want to watch the footage that we have on the page, please you can take a look at them. We would like to remind you that we have simultaneous interpreting and you can speak in your mother tongue and then you can also listen to the interpreting. You should not have a connection through cell phones, but we have already for
Já tínhamos previsto anteriormente. Obrigada, e em breve começaremos.
Y para pagarlo, lo dejan
Algunos imperialistas se preguntan por qué ayudamos a los angoleños. ¿Qué interés?
What's the interest that we have there with Angola? They're used to thinking that when a country does something, they're looking for oil, a cover of diamonds, or any kind of natural resources. No. We are not looking for any materials interest, and the imperialists do not understand that because they follow chauvinist criteria, selfish criteria. We are fulfilling an international moral duty when we assist the people of Angola.
La gesta cubana.
The Cuban feat in Africa contribute to the national liberation process in the 17 countries that achieved their independence, following the legacy and internationalism of the commander-in-chief. Cuba and Africa for decades have had bonds of friendship. The history of the Cuban cooperation in Africa is one of the first to highlight when we're taking a look at the solidarity of Cuba with the peoples. Around 30,000 cooperants in health and education, science, and other sectors have rendered their services to the African people in the region of Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. No doubt, international cooperation is a key element when it comes to the foreign policy of the Cuban Revolution since its triumph on January the 1st, 1959. Cubans have cooperated in several countries in Africa, building hospitals, providing medical care. They have participated in all important sectors for the development of those nations. No doubt, a link was sealed that is characterized by defense of unity, respect, integration, and the fight for the well-being of the African peoples. Our country is not launching bombs against the peoples, but rather our country shall be able to send the doctors who are needed to the darkest corners of the world. Doctors, no bombs. Good afternoon and good evening to our friends who are with us from the African continent. In this footage, a link to the Cuban cooperation and the African continent while beginning this virtual meeting of solidarity with Cuba. Our brothers from Africa, please be welcome to this fraternal meeting. As our dear Commander-in-Chief said, Fidel Castro, without spirit of solidarity, there should have been independence. Without spirit of solidarity, there should have been revolution. We wouldn't have been able to defend it. We couldn't have survived. That's why Cuba attaches such a great importance to solidarity. Good afternoon, friends. In early mornings, the President of the Republic of Cuba and First Secretary of the Communist Party, Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez, sent in Twitter a message.
Abrazo.
I would like to salute all those who are meeting today in this Continental Conference in solidarity with Cuba for the common root and the shared blood, Fidel, Che, Tambo, the independence. We are joined this afternoon by Joel Queipo Ruiz, members of the Secretary of the Central Committee of the PCC, and he is the head of his economics department. Fernando González Yort, he is the president of ECAP. Commander Victor Dreke Cruz, our dear Commander Moya, who is currently the president of the Friendship Association with Africa, Orlando Villavicencio, hero of the Republic of Cuba, and Gerardo Hernandez. He's a hero of the Republic of Cuba, and he's currently the coordinator of the committees for the defense of the revolution. Also with us, His Excellency Lancer Hugo, representing the diplomatic corps from Africa accredited to Havana. The sports persons, Ismael Cardones, Eric Lopez, and Dairon Robles, Also, outstanding figures from the Cuban culture like Rafael Lai, José Rodríguez Fuster, and Pedro de la Hoz. Oh, with us in the room, a representation of African students who are studying in Cuba, as well as officials from ECAP, the International Relations Divisions for the Central Committee, the Cuban Women Federation, the CTC, also the National Assembly of the People's Power, the Youth Communist League, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the National Association of Small Farmers. Welcome to this African Continental Conference Solidarity with Cuba. On the occasion of this event, the Speaker of the National Assembly of the People's Power and President of the Council of State, Esteban Lazo Hernandez, he sent a message to our African friends who have joined us in the defense of the Cuban Revolution. Now I would like to share this message with you. Dear sisters and brothers from Africa, first and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers of this Continental Conference of Solidarity with Africa and with Cuba, actually, for this invitation extended to me to attend this meeting. It enables me, of course, to share with you once again the deep love, admiration, and respect that I feel for the African continent. Of course, we have to say that we are tied to that continent with cultural and deep historical ties of solidarity and brotherhood. We are actually proud of African roots that are vivid in the idiosyncrasy of the Cuban people because of the contribution of over 1.2 million Africans who came to Cuba, who were detached by force from their homelands by the slave trade. And it was key in the shaping up of the Cuban nationality. The African descendants were decisive during the struggle for independence in Cuba. They represented the majority, or they integrated the majority of the troops of the Liberating Army, and most of the military leaders who show such courage and bravery, were able to show this in the battlefields. Cuba is honored to have the opportunity to contribute to the struggles against colonialism and racism in Africa. Over 300 combatants from Cuba fought against hatred, injustice, and domination in that continent, out of which over 2,000 lost their lives in the African soil. We have to say there was a mixture of African and Cuban blood, a bond that unites us forever. In a very simple way, but also great at the same time. Fidel so much.
Amigos, buenas tardes.
Uh, Good afternoon, friends. I would like to apologize because we have power cut here in the room. We're going to play the footage once again by Esteban Lasso, the Speaker of the National Assembly. Dear brothers and sisters from Africa, first and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers of these Continental African Conference of Solidarity with Cuba. I would like to thank them for the invitation extended to me to participate in this conference. By doing so, I can share with you once again the deep love, admiration, and respect that I feel for that continent to which we are united by deep historical bonds, but also in the field of cultural solidarity and brotherhood. We are actually proud of our African roots that can be present in the idiosyncrasy of the Cuban people because of the contribution of over 1.2 million who arrived in Cuba, who were detached by force from their homelands because the abominable slave trade. This was fundamental in the shaping up of the Cuban nationality. The African descendants play a key role during the fight for independence of Cuba. They were the majority of the troops in the liberating army and also most of the major leaders who showed such courage and bravery in the battlefield. Cuba is honored to have the opportunity to contribute to the fights against colonialism and racism in Africa. Over 300,000 Cuban fighters fought against hatred, injustice, and domination in the continent, out of which over 2,000 lost their lives. In the African soil, Cuban blood and African blood was mixed. This is a bond that unites us forever. In a simple but also great way, Fidel summarized all these historical process and the phrase that I quote: "Without Africa, without their sons and daughters, without their languages and their gods, Cuba would not be what is Cuba at present." The Cuban people, therefore, has an eternal debt with Africa that increases with the heroic history that we have shared. This was said during his visit to South Africa in 1998. True to his legacy, it is up to us to further strengthen the relations of solidarity and cooperation among Africa and Cuba for the benefit of our peoples. And we also have to defend these bonds from those who try to divide us and undermine the cooperation sovereignly independent implemented by our peoples. At the parliamentary level, We also have very strong ties with the African continent. Nevertheless, we want to further strengthen the relations among our parliaments in order to extend it and to make it more dynamic. For that, we want to increase the contacts among parliamentary groups of friendship, to have more virtual meetings that can bring us together from our distance, and also to foster greater exchange of information, experience, and consultation at the parliamentary level internationally. This greeting, although it's very brief, this is a new opportunity to thank you for what you do to support the heroic battle for our peoples in the face of the genocidal blockade imposed on us by the U.S. government for over 6 decades. A blockade that, as we all know, has been reinforced cynically in the midst of the difficulties caused by the pandemic, with 243 measures imposed by the Trump administration that are still present during the current administration. We are certain that we should always count on the solidarity of our African brothers. Before I conclude, I would like to remind you the words of Mandela during his visit to Cuba in 1991, and I quote, "The Cuban people has a special place in the heart of the African peoples." End of quote. Cubans can assert proudly that the feeling is mutual. Fraternal greetings and success in this conference that will bring us together. Thank you.
Comrade Fernandos Gonzalez, the president of the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. It gives me great pleasure to have been invited to participate in the virtual 7th African Continental meeting of solidarity with Cuba. This meeting is very important, and I could not have come at any opportune moment for progressive nations and peace-loving peoples around the world to express our solidarity with the resilient Cuban friends and comrades during this difficult time when COVID-19 came to disrupt our world. Mr. President, the relationship between the Cuban and the Namibian peoples was forged in the struggle against apartheid colonialism. We, the Namibian people, will never forget the heroic of Cuban internationals and the Battle of Quituquana Valley, where we defeated the white minority regime of South Africa and eradicated apartheid colonialism from the face of our continent. This was achieved through solidarity, and it is therefore a great concern that the global community has not sustained the principle of solidarity and cooperation in the securing equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. This is an indictment of humanity that more than 82% of the world's vaccine doses have been acquired by the West countries while less than 1% has gone to low-income countries. We therefore agree with the call of the Roman Declaration of Global Health for voluntary licensing and technology transfer to boost vaccine production and reaffirm our call for fair and equitable distribution of vaccines. Mr. President, over the past 3 decades, the world through the UN General Assembly has consistently voted against unilateral coercive measures through economic, commercial, and financial blockade of Cuba, but to no avail. As a result, the people of Cuba have been subjected to undue suffering, which was further aggravated by COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, the most cruel and long-lasting economic, commercial, and financial blockade ever applied against any nation has been tightened during this pandemic, and the current democratic administration of the United States of America maintains unchanged the 243 coercive measures adopted by the former Republican administration of President Donald Trump. We thus strongly condemn this new attack against Cuba and urge President Joe Biden, who stood against apartheid as a Senate and supported President Barack Obama as Vice President in his policy of rapprochement with Cuba, to lift this embargo that has been a negative impact on the Cuban economy and brought untold suffering and agony to the Cuban people. In the same vein, we call on President Joe Biden to assist with the implementation of other blockade resolutions that were adopted by the African Union, including condemning the interference in Cuba's internal affairs and demanding for the return of Guantanamo Bay to the Cuban people. Similarly, we are opposed to every attempt to destabilize and subvert the constitutional order, as well as destroy the work that was initiated by Commander Hugo Chavez and continued by President Nicolas Maduro in favor of the Venezuelan people. In addition, we reiterate our call for the right to self-determination of Palestinian people and a complete withdrawal from their occupied territories, as well as call for withdrawal of Israel observer status at the African Union. Finally, we call on the independence of the Sahrawi people to determine their own destiny and look forward to the conclusion of the process in Western Sahara so that the people of that country can freely determine their own future. In conclusion, I am confident that the Cuban people will continue defending their sovereignty and reaffirm day by day their spirit of sacrifice and the confidence in the victory inspired by the example of the historical leader El Comandante Fidel Castro Russo. Long live the friendship between Namibia and Cuban, long live the African continent, long live with the Cuban people. I thank you.
Acabamos de escuchar
We just heard the message of a true friend of Cuba and our commander-in-chief, our dear Sam Nujoma, the founding father of the independence of Namibia. Now I would like to give the floor to the president of ECAP, Fernando González Yor. Dear friends, brothers and sisters of solidarity for Cuba and Africa, first and foremost, I would like to give you a fraternal greeting of a people who is accompanied by that huge and novel African continent in its restless struggle for a better future. Today, we are initiating virtually this African Continental Conference of Solidarity with Cuba with the essential objective to strengthen the bonds of friendship, of solidarity that unite us, and to invite us to reflect on what we can do better or what we have done yet to face the multiple challenges and dangers that are causing a threat to us, always in a restless march after the footprints that taught us the best way to follow. We share a rich history. In this month of October, we pay tribute to the memory of the Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro Ruz and Commander Ernesto Che Guevara, who are symbols of the fight for independence of the African and Cuban peoples. We also recall historical figures from Africa like Thomas Sankara and Oliver Tambo, as well as the unforgettable example of the historical leaders of independence of the countries of this sister nation, whose figures are eternal in the Park of African Heroes in the capital of all Cubans. We have actually the highest number of diplomatic representations in Africa. I would like to thank the brothers and sisters of a country from which we have constant shows of solidarity. A continent that we also owe our own existence as a rebel, dignified nation, because to our gene from Africa, this will continue with this and much more. Our commander-in-chief said on one occasion, and I quote, "Without Africa, without his sons and daughters, without his culture and customs, without its languages and gods, Cuba would not be what it is today. The Cuban people has therefore a debt with Africa that is increased with the heroic history that we have shared." End of quote. We highly appreciate the actions that friend and friendship associations have done to oppose the criminal and unfair economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed on our country during over 60 years by the United States government, and that many others added with creativity in multiple ways and despite of difficulties to the initiative that emerged in the United States, the one of the caravans that called for its total lifting, an unconditional lifting as well. We would like to thank for the resolution approved every year by the African Union, asking for the immediate lifting of the criminal U.S. blockade, as well as the statements made by governments, parliaments, political parties, association of solidarity, personalities, and friends. In an opportunistic fashion, in the midst of a pandemic that has just halted the entire world, the government of Donald Trump reinforced the blockade with 243 additional measures that harm the Cuban people and families as never before, and actually further strengthen the work of subversion, also both politically and ideologically, a situation that has now changed with the new administration from the United States. But this was not enough for the empire. The genocidal and interference policy of the United States government towards Cuba, and on the 11th of July of this year, there was a brutal campaign of destabilization designed and financed from U.S. territory, and taking advantage of the difficulties faced by the country as a consequence of the blockade and the pandemic. They call upon disturbances and social lack of discipline, manipulating the reality, and of course criticizing the management of a government that is a restless government in the search for solution to problems that affect the well-being of the Cuban people. They call upon chaos to provoke the reaction of the law enforcement and the revolutionary people, and thus generate the perception that in Cuba there is a violation of human rights. They applied also an intense media campaign in which they multiplied the fake news and the messages to manipulate the feelings of people. Of course, using sophisticated algorithms, the social media, in order to fabricate an image of a social explosion and a situation of lack of government that could justify, in the face of the international community, an alleged humanitarian intervention, or more clearly, a military intervention. Of course, majority of the Cuban people, countries from the entire world, parties and political organizations and solidarity organizations have supported the revolution, and they have rejected the strategy of the U.S. imperialism to defeat the Cuban political system. Cuba shall never surrender to the pressures exerted by the imperialism, neither blockades nor aggressive campaign, no matter the type, could take us apart from the path set by the ideas of our national hero José Martí, and the ones that have led us has been led with wisdom and firmness by the Commander-in-Chief and Army General Raúl Castro Ruz. The aggression and the hostility that we face, with the wisdom and creativity of our people, with their proven capacity of endurance, of determination to overcome, and also we face this with the solidarity of the sister nations in the world. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible for this small island to become the first country in Latin America and the Caribbean to develop 3 vaccines, and it also has 2 additional vaccine candidates of its own, apart from facing COVID-19 also internationally. And we have had in over 40 countries the soldiers of white vest from the international contingents of doctors specialized in disaster situations and serious epidemics. Henry Reed, I would like to thank you for the support that you have given us for the nomination to the Peace Nobel Prize. Without the devotion of our people, we wouldn't have had internationalist missions, neither that nor the Latin American School of Medical Sciences that has benefited so many young African students who are also saving lives in the midst of the pandemic, who are actually the present and the future of a very important part of solidarity of our country with Africa. We're together, and we are based on deep cultural and historical ties, and we guard these. Also, we do this through the cultural associations and the Association of Cuban African Friendship, the House of Africa, among others. Since the triumph of the revolution in 1959, Cuba has exercised internationalism. We have true to our principle solidarity towards our African brothers. Therefore, we were together in the fight against colonialism and apartheid. That's why we're together in the fight for development. In 1963, our country sent the first medical brigade of cooperation to Algeria. Ever since, solidarity and cooperation have expanded and they have diversified. Thousands of Cuban cooperants have rendered their services in that continent, and over 3,000 African students have graduated in Cuba in different specialties. Today, around 6,000 Cuban cooperants in the fields of health, education, sports, and agriculture are working in 32 African continents, while around 9,000 scholarship students from that continent are studied in Cuban higher education centers. This is our commitment to Africa. This is our sacred internationalist duty. This is the solidarity that we shall always be willing and ready to provide. Also, greetings to our Sahrawi friends with our unchanged position to look for a solution to the question of Western Sahara that guarantee the exercise of legitimate right of the Sahrawi people to free determination in accordance with the purpose and principles of the United Nations Charter. Comrades, the right to free determination, sovereignty of the peoples, and peace is a principle of the revolution that we shall always defend, even online. This is a new scenario where we can fight and that we should always be present in. We encourage you to remain active, to use all tools and resources within our reach, and not to disregard any action, no matter how small it might seem. Africa shall always count on the gratitude, eternal friendship, of solidarity of your Cuban brothers. Long live friendship and solidarity among the peoples. Ever onwards to victory. I would like to thank the president of ECAP, and now I would like to give the floor to a person who has very close links with the African continent, solidarity and internationalism. We're talking about our dear commander, Moya, an international combatant who was part of the Che guerrilla. He's the current president of the Association of Friendship with Africa. General, you have the floor.
Hermanos,
dear African brothers, present and past future compels us today as an imperative for the survival of the human species, as Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro Ruz said in his speech at the Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, to meet again to review common problems and find similar visions, so that with cooperation we can find the resources and ways to face this successfully. Comrades all, more than a year and a half, the world has been facing the COVID-19 pandemic, and there is still no exact vision about the scope and consequences of the pandemic. The World Health Organization demands vaccines for the poorest countries. The richest countries are using this for commercial purposes. There will be no solution for those positive cases and for those who have no resources for a diagnosis test. Only working together we can save ourselves. The economic problems and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in our countries compels us to reflect together regarding the scope of these problems, dimensions, and potential solutions. Solidarity is the word of the current world, like the solidarity that you provide us in the wake of the criminal, cruel blockade of the U.S. government against the Cuban people. Stepped up amidst this pandemic. For us, your support under these circumstances is fundamental. United States tries to asphyxiate us economically and put us to our knee or to surrender by hunger. But the people of Martí, Maceo, and Fidel will resist. We will continue to develop and we will overcome. We will always stand up as Fidel taught us and Raúl, and together with our current president, we will overcome all the obstacles. The Cuban African Friendship Society, the result of the efforts and the struggle against colonialism in Africa, considers that Africans continue providing their support to Cuba during this virtual intercontinental African meeting of solidarity with Cuba. You can rest assured, African comrades, that despite its difficulties, Cuba is the same Cuba. The Cuba of Fidel, the Cuba of Raúl, the Cuba of Díaz-Canel, and the Cuba of Che Guevara. You can count on us. You can count on us because Cuba does not give what it has in excess. We share what we have, and this is the dignity of this people of Maceo and Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Long live solidarity between Cuba and Africa.
Muchísimas gracias.
We thank our dear Commander Moya and Comrade Fernando. Cuba will be loyal to the principles and ideals of our invincible Commander-in-Chief, Fidel Castro Ruz. Our friends that are participating in this meeting through our social networks in Facebook and YouTube. We welcome the ICAP delegations of the Camagüey, Ciego de Ávila, and Villa Clara provinces, as well as our friends from South Africa, the Cuban diplomatic missions in Nigeria, Botswana, Uganda, and Liberia. Friends, in recent years, the country has been hit by attacks and actions to destroy the Cuban Revolution. Today we are privileged to have this roundtable that will give us important information about the hostile policy of the United States against Cuba and the economic measures implemented by our country to address the consequences and impact of this genocidal blockade and to address the COVID-19 pandemic. We will also have the words of a young African student here in Cuba who is studying medicine. We now give the floor to Johanna Tablada, Deputy Director of the U.S. Department of the Foreign Ministry, the Deputy Minister of Economy and Planning, Dr. Regla Angula, Deputy Minister of Public Health, and Ismael Umaro, a African student studying in our country.
Buenos días.
Good morning and good afternoon and almost good night. Can you hear me? Brothers and sisters in the African country present in this meeting, one of the characteristics of Cuba's foreign policy, as we all know, has been the commitment with the African continent, the roots of which is so strong in our foreign policy and in our own identity. Sorry, but I have to remove my mask. I was saying that it was an honor to be here with you today because of the deep bonds between the Cuban people and the African people. We believe that we need to explain and update you on the real status of the U.S. policy towards Cuba. The Cuban Revolution would not be the same without the African solidarity. Cuba would not be the same without Africa. This stems from the solidarity and the understanding. I want to say that the U.S. policy on Cuba has nothing to do with what is happening today in Cuba. It has nothing to do with what is happening in Cuba. It's a policy that is linked to processes within the United States. And I would like to give you two examples. On the one hand, extreme polarization in that country between extreme white sectors, almost fascist sectors, and sectors that would like to see a change in unjust processes in that country. Demonizing Cuba contributes to those sectors that want to identify any progressive cause or any social country with that internal battle so as to prevent any progressive movement in the United States. Our sisters and brothers in Africa know about the corrupt election process in the United States and the importance of the state of Florida due to the number of votes and the manipulation of the Cuban vote that is characterized by corruption. They try to make us believe that the Cuban migrants want the U.S. government to succeed in their objective to topple the Cuban Revolution. to justify the level of pressure, harassment, and abuse in U.S. policy on Cuba today, they require a justification. And as there is no basis in international law and no moral basis, because it is totally inhuman to asphyxiate an entire population to impose a different system, different from the system that population wants. Then we have the current situation. There is a very dangerous situation, as Comrade Fernando said and Commander Drake said, and President of Parliament Lazos said the Cuban people should not be subjected to the situation we are facing just to please a sector of the United States that has nothing to do with the international community's interest of lifting the blockade. We have 62 years of blockade with a constant impact on our daily life. Then we have the policy of pressure by Trump to guarantee supplies and the survival of our population. So actions against oil shipments to Cuba, South-South programs, South-South cooperation that provide incomes to Cuba. All the aspects, the important and positive aspects of the revolution have been demonized. To this, we must add this policy of strangling Cuba, because if you close a window, there will be no air. If you cut the supply of oil or fuel, then people cannot live. So they want to make the Cuban government responsible for actions that are closely linked to the actions of our neighbor that under the pandemic have reminded us the worst attitudes since time immemorial. Then Biden, due to the protests in some U.S. sectors that know what is the real situation in Cuba, and the demands by different countries, particularly the African country. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the African country for their statements in the summit of the African Union, recognizing and acknowledging the work of our Cuban doctors. I said that the U.S. policy has nothing to do with what is happening in Cuba, but our deputy ministers will tell you of what is really happening in Cuba in terms of healthcare and vaccines, where important changes and developments are taking place to address the legitimate demands of our populations. And one thing is the changes to address the demands of our population, and when the next speakers talk, you will see why the U.S. policy on Cuba has nothing to do with our reality. Cuba is one of the countries that makes more contribution to human rights for all, including peoples near to our heart but geographically apart. We struggle for a better world for all. We struggle for a better country for all. So to summarize, the Biden administration does not have its own agenda, its own policy, and it has assumed the worst narrative to prolong a inhumane policy against our people and the worst actions. And I'll give you 3 examples, and with this I will conclude. How can you ratify on January 22 and May 14 the inclusion of a country that has struggled against terrorism and has been victim of terrorism in a list of countries sponsoring terrorism? That should be denounced. And Cuba took from Africa important characteristics for its identity, and Cuba needs Africa today to denounce this monstrosity. The Cuban Revolution would not be the same without the African solidarity. Africa can always count with Cuba, and the Cuban Revolution will always need that knowledge, love, and solidarity and wisdom that Africa can give us, so that we can explain others that these campaigns to justify these actions against Cuba are not justifiable. So I thank Africa, my African sisters and brothers, and the Cubans working in the foreign service in that continent.
Buenas a nuestros hermanos.
Hello, brothers and sisters from Africa and all those following this meeting in the social media. The economic, commercial, financial, and technological blockade imposed by the U.S. government, we can show you numbers that for over 60 years it has impacted the economic and social development of our country. It is the most comprehensive, unequal, and protracted economic warfare against any nation. And our people has faced it, and we must say that solidarity links with our country, especially from the African continent, have allowed us to ratify our rejection to this hostile policy and denounce it internationally. Only in a socialist system based on social justice and the unity around our party and government to defend the country allows a developing nation, and rather small nation like ours with limited natural resources, from collapsing and even advancing in its development. Since 2017, the U.S. government has imposed over 243 coercive measures, including 55 in the year 2020 itself, that with objective data we can illustrate the damage they have caused to the Cuban economy. Just to mention some, 231 Cuban companies have been subjected to additional restrictions to those of the blockade. Entities that are engaged in retail trade and they pursue Cuban financial transactions worldwide, which damages our ability to pay for the services and goods we import and also makes it impossible for us to collect our exports. The U.S. government has also deliberately hindered the importing of required inputs to face and fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. They have banned all remittances to Cuba. They have maintained the travel ban, and since 2019, U.S. cruise ships cannot call on Cuban ports, and they have made it impossible for Cuba to access to technological platforms whose companies are subjected to U.S. laws. Over 60 softwares, systems, and services are restricted for Cubans. And we Cubans, as you know, we are targeted by fake news, the dissemination of distorted video, and cyber attacks. Using the international methodology for this purpose results in the update of these blockade impact from April to December 2020. We may say that the economic impact at current prices was of $3.85 billion. And if we assess the accumulation throughout these years, it is around the 147 and more $billion. And of these amounts, 84.6% are damages caused by technological problems, geographic location of the government, and the impact on our import of goods and services. If we assess this impact in our economic development, we may say that we have lost $73.5 million due to profit loss from Cuban exports of goods and services, damages caused because we cannot have access to the U.S. market, which prevents us from holding transactions with companies and subsidiaries based in third countries or with third country companies that have merged with U.S. companies or interests, and also linked to the implementation of extraterritorial laws or provisions that also impact our imports or exports negatively. We have faced reference based on references of U.S. companies. We have faced increased freight costs and for the import of the required goods and services for our country. We've also faced tariff increase, and we have had to travel longer distances to have access to international trade. There's also been increased sale of our goods in foreign markets, and also our resources are immobilized. So when we have access to international market, we try to buy as much goods as we can on the basis of our available income in order to ensure our development and to ensure the sustainability and continuity of our processes. Concerning the impact in the production of goods and services, they are around the $134.4 million because we cannot purchase spare parts, raw materials, and products that cannot be substituted by other suppliers. And also we are affected by delays when we are forced to replace these inputs. and as well as my colleague, the Deputy Minister Regla, will mention, the healthcare system has also suffered. In 2020, we faced a significant impact and has created additional restrictions for our country to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. The financial damages are in the order of the 404 millions of dollars due to exchange rates, the depreciation of the US dollar vis-a-vis other hard currencies, interest rates that are higher than those in the standard international market, persecution of our financial assets outside the banking system, and we are all familiar with fines banks that dare engage in financial transactions with our country have faced. We also face losses for the exercise of rights and services that we provide to our population, and we're talking about $12.7 million, including damages for non-liquidated income for the performance of Cuban artists abroad, for copyright for Cuban authors, financial transfers, and others that negatively impact our population, including sanctions to the remittances from Cadeca to our population. We also face a technological blockade that is around the $1.2 billion, which we cannot have access to technological information of U.S. origin, which are more effective, more cost-effective, less raw material intensive, and that have a better yield and are more competitive, as well as the cancellation of accounts of Cuban media in several social media, and the rejection of offers for online courses, and the participation of our experts in online events. We have also assessed these losses in $6.5 million for encouraging migration and brain drain. Despite the U.S. blockade, the pandemic, the worldwide economic crisis, Cuba stands out for ensuring universal access to its population to healthcare, education, culture, sports, and social assistance. Cuban economy has shown its capacity of resilience vis-a-vis the obstacles brought about by the blockade, which allowed us to preserve the achievements of the Cuban Revolution. The National Development Plan up to the year 2030 is a clear expression of this will, and its goals and targets are intertwined with the Sustainable Development Agenda of the United Nations. Therefore, to transform this current scenario, we have adopted a number of measures to bring greater momentum to the social and economic development of our nation. And so we will foster a combination of the centralized nature of our socialist planning with the required autonomy and decentralization to our local companies and governments. As of January the 1st of 2021, after a decade of studies and research work, we began implementing the monetary overhaul, which we know is the magical solution to our economic problems, but allows us to improve the performance of the various economic agents in our country. This monetary overhaul, having one single currency, the salary increase, the reduction of subsidies and gratuities, the increase of pensions, have made sure that those in a vulnerable situation are preserved. Recently, rules were passed for new economic actors That is, for the first time in our country, the creation of small and medium-sized companies were authorized, while changes have also been introduced in non-agricultural cooperatives and for self-employed workers. For the first time, we are issuing rules to other types of properties, since the small and medium-sized companies can be either state-run, non-state, and joint ventures, so that they become actively involved in the economic life of our country and become a driver of our economy, so they can contribute to the growth of our economy and GDP. We want to create new industries and provide new services as we advance in the improvement of our and update of our model. Non-agricultural cooperatives are economic agents that have been operating in our country in an experimental manner since 2013, but now they have their own set of rules. We have flexibilized their rules because we believe this is a more social agent, as all partners are owners and incomes and dividends are distributed on the basis of the amount of work they each contribute. Also, self-employment has been flexibilized, and several self-employed workers are now allowed to transform their business into small and medium-sized companies. So self-employment will be only led for autonomous workers who can hire up to 3 family members, and if they exceed that number of workers, they must either change to a small or a medium-sized company or to a cooperative, and they have 1 year. Then gradually we will be assessing each of our businesses so our economic activity is improved. We have also expanded significantly the activities that can be exercised by self-employed workers. There are now today over 2,000 activities authorized. So the improvement of business agents is not limited to small and medium-sized companies, to self-employed workers, to cooperatives, but we also seek to strengthen socially state-run companies. A number of measures have ensured they become more autonomous, including their obligation of passing a centralized wage scale for incomes workers receive for the contribution to the production of goods or services provided to the Cuban economy. We have also implemented a system to decentralize hard currencies, either through exports by these various business agents for sales to the special development zone of Mariel, to production linkaging, which has brought about different dynamics to relations among all economic actors, to increase the competitiveness of our goods and services for the sake of our development. Also this year, in order to improve agriculture, 63 measures were also approved seeking to increase the production of agricultural products, including increasing credits, allowing for the direct sale of produce, etc. We are also betting for the update of our model and economic guidelines, particularly increasing foreign direct investment and strengthening the special development zone of Mariel, increasing exports, replacing imports, are basic principles of the current economic and social strategy of our country to cope with the worldwide economic crisis brought about by COVID-19. Other elements that we have developed this year is fostering local development with greater participation by provincial and municipal government, using their indigenous resources and with a combination of all community stakeholders, with the creation of a group of incentives that fosters local development in order that they contribute to the overall economic and social development of the nation. We believe that the conditions have been created to advance in this process, and we trust that the implementation of these set of measures will help us give momentum to the development of our nation, acknowledging our limitations. And we ratify that solidarity actions by the African continent are strategic for the social and economic development of our nation. Thank you very much.
Para la ciencia cubana, evidentemente el bloqueo sí existe y tiene un gran peso. O sea, nosotros normalmente trabajamos en protocolos de investigación y la primera consecuencia es que los pacientes de nosotros, estamos hablando de cáncer o Alzheimer, los pacientes no tienen el tratamiento que es estado del arte, porque muchas veces esas terapias son norteamericanas, son ramas de investigación donde el conocimiento avanza muy rápido y los ensayos nuestros no pueden hacerse con los medicamentos que constituyen el estado del arte. En este caso, la afectación fundamental es el paciente cubano que no tiene acceso a un medicamento que sí impacta en su supervivencia y en la calidad de vida, porque no podemos comprarlo, porque son medicamentos cuya patente no ha expirado, son medicamentos norteamericanos. Que muchos de los reactivos y muchas de las tecnologías que se usarían en el laboratorio son de origen norteamericano y no tenemos acceso a esa tecnología. Tenemos que hacer lo que se designa como triangulación, que es importar o esos equipos o esos reactivos a través de terceros países, lo cual encarece mucho el proceso para un país pobre como nosotros. Estos son un costo, por supuesto, muy elevado y en tercer lugar enlentece mucho el proceso. El ciclo de importación, al no poder comprar directamente con el proveedor, se demora muchos meses. Entonces, desde que uno genera la investigación, recoge la muestra biológica, uno no es capaz de demostrar el mecanismo de acción del medicamento o el biomarcador del medicamento porque no logra tener el reactivo a tiempo.
Distinguidos
Distinguished participants, African voters, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this important conference. It's a new opportunity to reaffirm the bonds of solidarity with the African continent. The relation between Cuba and the peoples of Africa having always characterized by solidarity, internationalism, and the fraternal bonds with Africa are part of our history. Recalling what we have done together in the field of health medical cooperation, as Fernando said, it started in 1963 when we sent the first medical brigade to Algeria. It was the result of the work of Fidel Castro and his deep solidarity feeling. Ever since, cooperation has not ceased in the African continent. During the last 58 years, we have increased little by little to 37 countries in South Yemen. We emerged the training program with Cuban advisors when we opened the first medical school. Then we expand these to other continents in Africa, and Uganda, Ghana, Gambia, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. We also teach students coming from rural areas how we created the Latin American School of Medical Sciences together with the rest of the medical schools in Cuba. Thousands of African doctors have graduated in those schools. Another landmark in the medical cooperation was the immediate response from Cuba in the face of the call of the World Health Organization in the fight against the Ebola pandemic in Western Africa. 3 brigades from the Henry contingent worked in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea-Conakry. Currently, we work with over 28,000 cooperants in 60 countries, out of them 27 African continents. This is a sustained increase that has been possible because of the strengthening and development of the national health system in Cuba, and also with the support of the Cuban population. This is a result of the altruist teaching that knows a lot about the African continent. Cuba is still a country with economic difficulties under a blockade, but with convictions and purposes that have not been modified and shall never be modified, no matter how critical times may be. Great challenges for the healthcare system and the government is actually the COVID-19 pandemic in the world, with major economic impacts, and also in the social field, revealing critical statistics where the number of people who have gotten sick is over 236 million. To support this epidemiological situation, in spite of the unfair campaign to discredit international medical cooperation, there were 57 medical brigades from the Henry Reef continued to 41 countries, 12 of them for the African continent. Is another example of the altruism of Cuban professionals trained under the principles of internationalism of the Cuban Revolution. The Cuban strategy to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic in our country has as a premises the political will and the cross-cutting approach. The national plan to tackle the disease was implemented with prevention and control actions taken as a strength, primary level of care, the development of research and the biotechnological industry. Cuba created its own vaccine against coronavirus. 3 of them have been accredited by the National Regulatory Authority for Emergency Use, and 2 other vaccine candidates are in the phase of clinical trials. Since May, when the vaccination process started, 97.6% of the population over 2 years has at least 1 shot, and 58% with a full vaccination scheme. The purpose is to have the population over 2 years to be vaccinated before the end of this year. If we want to refer to a cornerstone of solidarity with the Cuban Revolution, we have to mention Africa. We would like to thank them for their strong support in the fight against the criminal blockade imposed on Cuba by the United States. The claims for the release of the illegally occupied territory in Guantanamo and the right of Cuba to its self-determination. Likewise, the heads of state and government from the African Union refer to this when they talk about cooperation among the people. Cuba shall continue to fight along with Africa and also to strengthen mutual relations with the peoples and government, which are renewed in several fields. We ratify our will to continue reinforcing the friendship bonds with that continent, to strengthen unity, peace, health, and hope. We do not want to conclude without recalling 2 great men of history to whom we have devoted this conference. September 1998, in the Good Hope ceremony in South Africa, the Commander-in-Chief of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro Ruz, recalled with a phrase, the one who also favored the African causes, Ernesto Che Guevara, and he said, brothers from Africa, brothers and sisters from all the poor peoples in the world, we shall continue along with you ever onwards to victory. Thank you very much.
Buenos días a todos los participantes en este
In this important solidarity meeting, we are once again in this African Intercontinental Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba that is held online given the sanitary situation that we all know about. A sanitary situation that has made social and economic difficulties more acute, particularly in third world countries, and has increased the gap between the north and the south. An example of this are the number of persons completely vaccinated against the SARS-CoV-2 virus in rich and poor countries. This makes us to reflect and to unite and multiply our solidarity. Today it is a source of pride, and we want to convey our congratulations to the Cuban authorities that despite the criminal and genocidal commercial, economic, and financial blockade, Cuba has been able to develop 5 vaccine candidates with which they are immunizing the Cuban population. It is a heroic act and talks about the resilience and intrinsic capacity of doing much with little of these people. We also congratulate the health authorities and the health professionals at different levels that act every day to save lives and provide health centers with inputs and materials for the daily work under a context that is becoming more and more acute due to the additional criminal sanctions by the U.S. administration. Dear friends, today more than ever the Cuban island needs us. It's a time for reflection and action. It's a time to raise our voices to reject the genocidal blockade. It is a time, dear friends, to organize ourselves and tend our hand to this sisterly nation that has provided us at times of need. Since the emancipation struggle to current times, like for example when the Ebola pandemic and the COVID-19 pandemic, this country has shared with us whatever it has, both human and material resources. It is time to reorganize and revitalize organizations and associations of graduates in Cuba and take actions. It is a time, dear participants in this solidarity meeting, to say once again that Cuba is not alone. We thank all the participants and long live brotherhood between our peoples.
A lo largo de todos estos
Throughout these years, we have had the privilege of sharing memorable moments. Africa is a symbol of solidarity with Cuba in the world. Thank you, Africa. Your support and sympathy has accompanied generations of Cubans since the very beginning of the revolution and the battles against the genocidal blockade and the media campaign of media transnationals. Now we invite our dear friend and former president of Mozambique, Joaquin Alberto Chisano, Suelma Beirut, Minister of Social Affairs of the Sahrawi Democratic Arab Republic, and our friend Abidum Aremu, coordinator of the Solidarity Movement with Cuba in Nigeria. We greet you and we give the floor to Abiodun Aremu from Nigeria.
Amandla, await. Amandla, await. We bring solidarity greetings from the Nigerian Movement of Solidarity with Cuba. We must salute in starting our African icon, who is still living, Comrade Sam Nujoma, the former president of the Republic of Namibia. We must equally salute Commander Victor Drake, Commander Moja, for his historic presence at this event. Our presentation is titled, "We must not tire, and we cannot be defeated." Revolutionary greetings to all delegates from the African world who are present at this special solidarity occasion being facilitated by ICAP. We salute President Fernando Gonzalez and the entire team of ICAP for their restless, dutiful, and exemplary commitment to duty, and in bringing about this conference. The Nigerian movement here speaks with painful feelings, but fond memories of two unforgettable comrades of ours who departed after the 2019 conference that was hosted. We lost Comrade Abdulkarim Motajo, the former president at his demise of the Nigerian, Cuban, and Friendship Cultural Associations. He was a leader in the movement, and he was with us at the last conference in Nigeria. We equally lost last month the immediate past ambassador of Cuba to Nigeria, Compañero Carlos Sosa, that was so dear to us and was like a father, a brother, uncle to every member in the movement. In our solidarity message on his demise, we had cause to recall that Ambassador Trejo meant everything to us in the movement. He was the initiator of uniting the various groups in Nigeria into what we know today as Nigerian Movement of Solidarity with Cuba. Trejo was lively, resourceful, highly knowledgeable, widely experienced, and a friendly personality with whom we share pleasantries and confidence. These two comrades are unforgettable. Which were at this virtual conference, I found that the relationship between Nigeria and Cuba is symbiotic and deep because we have shared historical and cultural heritage. It is not possible to speak of Cuba and the Cuban without reference to the tremendous influences of African, especially Nigerian culture. Hence, at this time of the tightening of the criminal U.S. blockade against Cuba, with over 253 punitive economic, financial, and commercial measures targeted at crippling the Cuban people, we the Nigerian movement cannot be indifferent. We are resolved to stand with Cuba as a duty and to defend the Cuban people and of the unparalleled gains of the Cuban Revolution. We declare to the whole world that Cuba is never and will never be alone. We acknowledge that despite the hardship that Cuba is facing as a result of the blockade, the sudden outbreak of the Delta variant of the COVID-19 and the fatal U.S. plot of insidious protests and campaigns of internal destabilization aimed at collapsing the revolution, the Cuban people have remained firm and resolute in the defense of truth, principles, and ideas of humanity. Cuba rose at the sacrifice of the medical brigade in saving lives in over 57 countries remains an exemplary and unparalleled achievement, for which the Cuban white shirt deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. At this point, in addressing solidarity with Cuba and facing the future together in the defense of humanity, permit us to reiterate the action plan for the African Movement of Friendship and Solidarity with Cuba as adopted at the 6th African Continental Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba. The plan, which as a result of the pandemic has likely not been implemented, I will just read a part of it. 1, to promote the legacy of Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro and the Cuban people in Africa in the form of conferences, commemorative activities, political events at different countries. Expand the solidarity movement in Africa to include, among others, all graduates of Cuba and their families. Strengthen and increase relationship between political forces, trade unions, youth organizations, women organizations, and friendship associations. Perform on the 17th of each month action demanding lifting of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed on Cuba by the United States government. To campaign to end the aggressive escalation and return of the territory occupied by the legal naval base in Guantanamo. Also to engage the parliament in every African country and the African unions. These are other action frameworks that were developed at the 6th African Conference are part of those things we want to bring to the fore of today's summit. Lastly, to prioritize the renovation of the structures that make up the solidarity movement with Cuba in a creative and comprehensive way. In conclusion, the solidarity action with Cuba is like a marathon race in which we must not tire as long as the prayer does not tire or is defeated. As you know, a people united can never be defeated. There is victory for us, solidarity forever. Cuba will outlive the U.S. criminal blockade, ever onward to the Cuban Revolution. Amanda! Await! Amanda! Await! Await you! Amanda!
Me junto a este movimento internacional de solidariedade com o povo cubano.
The Cuban people deserves our solidarity. The Cuban people suffered
Econômico e social. Depois da Revolução, liderada por Fidel Castro, nosso amigo,
the friend of
o povo cubano a começar a prosperar, vencendo o analfabetismo, vencendo a pobreza absoluta,
the absolute poverty, and increase scientific and technological knowledge.
aos povos africanos que ainda sofrem
that suffer from the colonial yoke, but still extended its solidarity until we
para o desenvolvimento do nosso país.
for the development of our nations and for the human development of our nations. We must thank the Cuban people. But the imposition by the US of sanctions against Cuba, the economic, commercial embargo, actually, rather than an embargo, is a blockade, brings suffering to the Cuban people that has experienced a deterioration in its living conditions. But it is a hardworking people. Without the embargo, without the blockade, Cubans would be an example, as they already are and have shown us. They would become an example of efficiency and sustainability and resilience, so that there are no more people left out and excluded. My opinion is that the US should lift those sanctions and embark in a process of rapprochement as former President Barack Obama, so that all required changes were made so that Cuba lives in a framework of better economic, social, and security conditions, and can become at international level an element of construction and conciliation. We hope that the embargo is lifted and that a dialogue begins, and we already know that the entire international community desires this dialogue. But the US also wants to sanction countries that want to cooperate with Cuba. But the US should gain consciousness and see all the damages and suffering they're causing to the Cuban people. We believe that international relations should seek inclusion of all and not to leave anyone out. Long live the Cuban people. Long live the memory of Fidel Castro Cruz.
Buenos días a todas.
Good morning, everyone. Dear comrades all, dear brothers and sisters from Cuba, from the Democratic Sahrawi Republic, from the Ministry of Social Affairs and Women Affairs, and for the advance of women, I am honored to be here in this important day with all of you. It is an important day because we celebrate, discuss this important day, which is the 7th Conference of Solidarity of Cuba with Africa and of Africa with Cuba, which we are used to celebrating this day of solidarity. And throughout our history, Cuba has always been present and lending a helping hand and standing side by side with all of us Africans. And that is why we will always be in your debt for everything that Cuba has done for us Africans, and especially for what Cuba has done for us Sahrawis. Since our country was invaded in 75 by the Kingdom of Morocco, our neighbor. In those harsh and difficult days in which we were suffering that attack, Cuba was there to open its doors, to lend a hand, opens its schools and hospitals, and opened up its hearts to all Sahrawis fleeing our country because they were being persecuted by the Moroccan army. All fighters from the civil society were persecuted, and Cuba was there by our side in those difficult times. And like Eduardo Galeano well said, solidarity is horizontal and entails mutual respect. That type of solidarity is that one that Cuba undertakes in all countries, and particularly in Africa. There is no African country that is not familiar or knows Cuban professors, Cuban doctors, Cuban engineers, and Cuban solidarity. Doctors have come to eradicate diseases, epidemics, and cure our ill. The same, our professors are also there to eradicate more serious illnesses, which is ignorance. That, as Jose Marti well said, ignorance kills peoples, entire nations. And Cuban professors have been there to help us out so that we can kill ignorance. Cuba is the model in which countries that fight for justice see as an inspiration. Countries that fight for a better life and for a more equitable world see in Cuba a model. That is a model that Cuba presents to us, and the model in which we are inspired in our struggle for a better life. Cuban solidarity brings hopes to all the dispossessed, of all those that have been wrongly exiled, and of the millions of Africans who dream of an Africa in which they can live in peace and prosperity. So we find our inspiration in the Cuban model. That is the model we strive for. We have learned a lot from Cuba as Africans. We have learned to fight for justice. Before, we were supposed to live our entire life humiliated, but from the Cuban people and the Cuban government, we have learned that we must fight, that we must even give our own lives and fight without fear instead of living on our knees our entire life. Because throughout years, for over 50 odd years, the U.S. blockade against Cuba have led the Cuban people to find the best ways to challenge it, and also to serve as an example for the entire world, to help those in need. Cuba has done a lot with very limited resources, not only for Cuba and the Cuban people, but they also came to the rescue of many other peoples, particularly of Africa and even from Europe, as we have recently seen with the pandemic of Ebola in Africa, and also the current COVID-19 pandemic in Europe. And Cuban brigades of doctors have also gone to Europe to save lives, and that is proof of the humanity and solidarity of Cuba with the rest of the world. So thank you, Cuba, for being as you are, because without you, we Africans perhaps would have never gotten this far. I'm sure that if it weren't for Cuba, we Africans weren't where we currently stand, because the vast majority of doctors that we have, not to say all, have been trained in Cuba. Our doctors, our engineers, the majority of them have been trained free of charge in Cuba without having to pay a cent, and they have received their training and have enjoyed the solidarity and been witnesses of the love of the Cuban people. And all those that have studied in Cuba have fond memories of the generosity of the Cuban people. And as Fidel said, to be an internationalist
los maestros, los ingenieros, todas las especialidades que tenemos ahora en África, en su inmensa. Deuda con la humanidad. Es saldar deuda con la humanidad. Pero creo, eso cito lo que dijo Fidel, ser internacionalista es saldar nuestra deuda con la humanidad. Pero creo que llegó el día de que nosotros somos los que tenemos que devolver o pagar, los que tenemos actualmente deuda con Cuba, todo lo que ha hecho por nosotros.
So we are indebted to Cuba for what Cuba has done for us.
Nosotros en este día tan importante, desear siempre lo mejor y para Cuba, para el pueblo cubano.
And I would like to say that here you have the Sahrawi people that is always thinking of you, because we always remember what Cuba has done for us and what Cuba is still doing for all of us. Thank you very much and good morning.
Muchísimas gracias a nuestros.
We thank our dear friends from Nigeria, our friend Chisano, and we thank you all for your messages. Thanks to you all, Cuba is not alone, and we continue the legacy of our commander Fidel Castro, and the long-standing friendship between Cuba and Africa continues. So I would like to take this minute to greet all of us that are joining us. We have friends from Ghana, from the Association of Friendship in Liberia, in Gambia, Sierra Leone, Namibia, Congo, Equatorial Guinea. I also would like to greet Fatia Musa, from Algeria, our medical brigades in Africa, also the educational brigade in Equatorial Guinea and Guinea-Bissau. We have African students in Guantanamo, our diplomatic missions in Burkina Faso, Botswana, Mozambique, Chad, Niger, Angola, Namibia, Mali, South Africa, the Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and also ICAP delegations in Guantanamo, Santiago de Cuba, the Isle of Youth, Holguín, Las Donas. We have also received messages from friends like Stephen Atafiri, president of the Pan-African movement, the Ugandan chapter, intellectuals, the Friendship Association between Cuba and Zimbabwe, the Association of Algerian Students in Cuba, and many more. We thank you all for joining us. I now grant the floor Agustin Asisariga, the delegate of the Association of Students, the Caimaneros, Angolan students graduated in Cuba. Then we will listen to Michael Makwaiba, president of the World Trade Federation. Then we will listen to Mandawiro Mganga, president of the Kenyan Communist Party. Then we will listen to Salimata Lo, vice president of the Cuba-Senegal Friendship Association. Thank you.
I studied in Cuba from 85 to 91 at the Isle of Youth. I was in the 27 and other schools. I am the so-called Caimaneros, who are that's how we're called, people who studied in Cuba. I'm the president of the former students in Cuba, the Caimaneros. Apart from Cuba, Cuba is our second homeland. We have been receiving assistance from Cuba for a long time, for a very long time, the field of health, education, development in general in our country. And what we want to say and what we wish for the Cuban people is the best we can wish it. Thank you.
Lloyd Gonzalez and all delegates, the World Federation of Trade Union, WFTU, wishes to represent 105 million members across the continents around the world, bring you a revolution greetings and wishes ICAP and all delegates a successful virtual solidarity conference with Cuba in the African continent. We also want to send our message to our trustee affiliates, the Servant of Workers in Cuba, one of the longest serving member of our federation, CTC of Cuba. The last conference held in Namibia saw the participation of Yotiva, who fought against apartheid oppression and was arrested in prison in Robben Island for 16 years in the same section as our former president Nelson Mandela for fighting for freedom and national independence of Namibia. Even after his release from prison in 1984, he continued his activism whilst in exile in Lusaka, Zambia. As part of SWAPO, we pay tribute to African heroes. In the past recent years, there has been a progressive and systematic increase of tightening of U.S. policy against Cuba. And all sovereign states that maintain and attempt to establish commercial and financial relations with Cuba. The Trump administration reinforced the economic, commercial, and financial blockade until it reaches extraordinary level of aggressiveness and hostility, add to 249 unilaterally cohesive economic action and measures against Cuba. In the last 2 years, we have seen a neoliberal policy being exposed in many developed and developing countries where the health infrastructure failed to save the life of citizens. Cuba, in addition to coping with the pandemic within its border and guided by the humanity and fraternally vocational of its people, reinforce its international medical cooperation by sending more than 3,800 cooperation workers organized in 52 medical brigades to 39 countries and territories affected by the diseases. These specialists have been joined by those who were already offering their services in 59 states prior to the outbreak of pandemic. The effort to save lives is, however, compromised by continuous harassment by the USA government through renewal laws that strengthen the blockade against this nation and its people. WFTU will continue to call for the immediately lifting all these illegal economic and financial commercial blockade so as to allow the Cuban people to flow economically, policy that they choose as a sovereign country. WFTU therefore will continue to call upon UN, AU, and all member states to denounce this barbaric foreign policy of the United States and call for an end to economic terrorism against Cuba. Viva Cuba! Long live the spirit of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Thank you.
Mganga, and currently the chairperson of Kenya-Cuba Friendship Society, and also the national chairperson of the Communist Party of Kenya. We were supposed to be meeting this year in Maputo, Mozambique, as the African Solidarity Committee meeting with Cuba. And I like now that we are doing in a video conference, I'll just wish to reiterate the position we took in Abuja in 2018, that we support the people of Cuba always, and even is a debt we are paying to them for Cubans being our really blood brothers, who even shed their blood in our country in the fight against apartheid and in the fight against colonialism, and who today are holding the flag of socialism in the world. And in that way, we want to condemn the economic, commercial, and the financial blockade imposed upon Cuba by the United States of America. We thought that the Biden administration which pretends to be fighting for human rights all over the world that will stop this diabolical conspiracy against Cuba, which has never worked. But instead, they have continue to impose the same imperialist policy of strangling Cuba, even the Democrats. So we know now whether Democrats or Republicans, they are the same people, but they will not defeat the will of the people of Cuba, and they will not defeat the solidarity of Africa with Cuba and the world which fights for international solidarity and friendship and against imperialism. So we reiterate that the Cuban people should always count on Kenya, all the friends of Kenya to support of their socialism and support of the people of Cuba. We shall do all we can to support Cuba, even as we prepare for another Africa Solidarity Committee Cuba meeting again in Maputo when the COVID pandemic now is out.
Junto al busto del héroe nacional de Cuba.
The national hero of Cuba, José Martí, in the monument to the African rebirth here in Senegal, in representation of the Friendship Association between the peoples of Cuba and Senegal, we salute the Continental African meeting and we convey a message of solidarity with Cuba. We reiterate our firm rejection to the blockade by the United States government against the Cuban people that has been causing harm to the Cuban families. We also call upon the end of subversion and the destabilization campaign against a country like Cuba. We would like this Continental Conference of Solidarity and Sisterhood may be held once again in the future. Cuba is not alone. Long live international solidarity.
Sin duda, Cuba no es.
No doubt Cuba is not alone and solidarity cannot be blocked. Thank you, Africa. In days prior to the event, also we have received messages to commend the hosting of this solidarity meeting from Mutumata Sure, graduated from Cuba, and the leader of the Guinean leader, and Dure as well, from the Association of Friends from Equatorial Guinea, from our medical brigades in Gambia, Congo, Algeria, Cape Verde, also from the Friendship Association in Tunis, Ghana, Gambia. I would like to thank you all for your messages. Now I would like to give the floor to other speakers. Pedro Pires, former president from Cape Verde, Kamal Kabala, president of the Friendship Association, Egypt, Cuba, again have been doctor who graduated from the medical school in Pinal del Rio, and current Secretary General of the Pan-African Health Alliance, Ana Belle Aleye, President of the Association of Friendship between the Peoples of Ethiopia and Cuba. From Africa and the Middle East, the solidarity with Cuba is non-stop. For the first time in the region, there were caravans against the blockade, and a group of Friends of Cuba created among the Botswanan press. In South Africa, there were actions in the first of the Embassy of the United States calling for the immediate lifting of the blockades against Cuba from Namibia and Mozambique. We have been schools that have been named after Fidel Castro, and they has been to support the Cuban Revolution. The support to the Cuban people has always been materialized with a donation that was supported by Cuban residents in these countries and graduates from medical school in Cape Verde and other African countries.
Amigas e amigos,
friends, This is my intervention when it comes to solidarity with Cuba. I would like to acknowledge also and to thank express my appreciation with Cuba. I have a duty of gratitude towards Cuba because all we have received from Cuba and the Cubans all during the combats to attain our independence. Also in the field of training, also we have been receiving solidarity from the Cuban people, and we also have received advisory. And it has enabled us to win a complex combat against our enemies. Also, I believe that Africans in general have a duty of standing in solidarity with Cuba. We have to take into account the contributions made by Cuba to our independence, and mostly in the case of Southern Africa. Apart from that, Cuba made a major contribution in the training of cadres, the first cadres of after the independence. At times in which Cuba is requiring our solidarity, it is our duty to extend in solidarity, to voice our solidarity. I personally am in disagreement with the policies of diplomatic isolation and material punishment. I'm talking also about economic isolation, other alike measures. I believe that the most important thing, what is actually necessary, is to engage in dialogue. All nations have that duty to stand in dialogue and to look for solutions through dialogue to prevent conflicts or all future problems. I think it's better to have a dialogue instead of isolating or to attack. I think in today's world, to avoid what could be actually complex in the field of international relations, and we have to work for a better understanding when it comes to dialogue, cooperation, to attain a fairer world and a more peaceful world, mostly in favor of a world that can provide opportunities for all men and women. Therefore, I would like to stand in solidarity with Cuba, with Cubans, and with its government. I thank you all for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and comrades, it gives me great honor to read this message on behalf of the board and members of Egypt-Cuba Friendship Association, CIFA. Firstly, I wish to forward my appreciation to His Excellency Fernando Gonzalez, President of ICAP, for inviting our association to share this historical event titled African Continental Virtual Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba. In fact, I was looking forward to attending this 7th African Continental Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba, which was agreed to take place in Mozambique next November, the same as CIVA already participated 2 years ago in Abuja. CIVA is firmly assuring its solidarity with Cuba, who for more than 60 years have been the subject of the United States government's genocidal policy of economic, commercial, and financial blockade. intensified by more than 240 coercive measures implemented by Trump administration that continue in force under Biden, accompanied now by a brutal media war clearly aimed at overthrowing the Cuban Revolution. Egypt and Cuba traditionally enjoyed cordial relations. CEVA strongly supports developing bilateral relations through increased political, economic, and cultural exchange between the two countries. CEVA is strongly demanding the U.S. to lift aggressive blockade against Cuba, the return of the territory illegally occupied at Guantanamo, and Cuba's right to self-determination. Dear friends and comrades, let us say together loudly, Cuba is not alone. Long live friendship and solidarity between Africa and Cuba. Long live Egypt-Cuba friendship.
Good morning to you all. I am Dr. Luma Akin. I am a doctor who graduated from the medical school in 2019. I'd like to take the floor today to stand in solidarity with Cuba. First, because Cuba is a solidarity nation, a nation that stands in solidarity with all countries, even the United States, that has been blocking Cuba since '63. Almost 60 years of blockade, and therefore Cuba has economic difficulties to meet its needs and what its people want. This is a violation to human rights. This is a violation to a country's rights, because everybody can do what they want when it comes to politics. Therefore, we would like to ask the United States to lift this blockade that is killing more people than coronavirus, because Cuba is undergoing a complex situation as a result of the health crisis. It is also because of the blockade that all countries at present can cure their patients, but Cuba has that difficulty because the United States has been imposing a blockade on them, have prevented Cuba from being free, truly free. Therefore, Cuba, we stand with you. We're going to continue fighting so that Cuba is free and so that Cubans can profit from the great country that revolutionary people have built for themselves. Long live the Cuban Revolution. Long live the maximum leader Fidel Castro. Long live all the revolutionary leaders in the Republic of Cuba. Down with the blockade. Cuba, we are all with you. Thank you.
Ante todo, quiero que le llegue mi sincero cordial.
First of all, I would like to bring warm greetings from Ethiopia. My name is Abebe Ayale. I studied in Cuba from 1978 to 1991. I began in my 5th grade, and then I studied my high school, and then in the Isle of Youth I also studied my senior high school, and then I graduated from transportation economy in the University of Oriente, and I graduated in 1991. We former students in Cuba, in different provinces of Cuba, we have an association called Friendship between Cuba and Ethiopia, and We call ourselves Ethio-Cubans because we spent our childhood in Cuba, so we speak Spanish, we love the Cuban culture, and we follow traditions that we learned in Cuba. So we experience the love of the Cuban people, so we are Ethiopian-born Cubans, so to speak. Our association pursues several goals, but its main objective is to strengthen relations and the friendship between the peoples of Cuba and Ethiopia. And now, through the Cuban embassy, we have received information that Cuba has also been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and by the stepping up of the U.S. blockade against Cuba. We must contribute. We must stand side by side with the Cuban people. So we began finding and raising funds and inputs or supplies to give as symbolic donations to Cuba, and we are preparing to ship medical supplies and medicines to the Cuban people. And that won't be the end of it. Our work will continue. We are in touch with the Cuban people, mostly through the social media. We have our Facebook page, Ethio-Cubans. You can access our Facebook page and you can find all the information on our membership, our association, current news from Cuba, Ethiopia. So we're always fighting to maintain our relationship. Even our children, our family members know everything that's going on in Cuba and know that Cuba has made a significant contribution, which is not easy. In 1977 and 1978, when we were invaded by Somalia, 163 Cuban soldiers lost their life in Ethiopia, and nobody can erase that from our mutual history that was written in human blood by both Cubans and Ethiopians. So I conclude by encouraging you to stay strong. We will advance together. Long live the friendship between Cuba and Ethiopia. Long live the friendship between the Cuban and Ethiopian people. And as we used to say when we were children back in Cuba, ever onwards to victory. Thank you very much.
We thank the speaker, and we now greet the Cuban Association of Moroccans living in France, graduates from Niger and Chad, the Cuban Friendship Association of Sierra Leone, the graduates of teaching centers will also take the floor, and we now give the floor to the Friendship Association of Friendship from Namibia and Cuba, the director of Latin America and of the Mali Foreign Office, and a graduate of the Medical Science University. We also give the floor to the president of the Cuba-Burkina Faso Friendship Association.
Cuidado ahí. Apóyate.
With Cuba. However, please permit me to extend my heartfelt revolutionary greetings to the government and people of Cuba
and a special one to ICAP, and not forgetting our other solidarity groups. I want to seize this opportunity to pay tribute to the Commander-in-Chief, to the memories of the Commander-in-Chief, Fidel Castro Ruz, whose vision permitted me or gave me the opportunity to be a professional person today, and to also Commander Ernesto Che Guevara, a symbol of internationalist independence. Having said that, I want to use this opportunity to also extend the following: that the Liberia-Cuba Friendship Organization will continue to strengthen the bonds of solidarity between our nations. That the Liberia-Cuba Friendship Organization condemn in its strongest term the unjust blockade against the people of Cuba. Thank you very much.
Statement by Ms. Cecilia Muzire, Secretary General of Namibia-Cuba Friendship Association, on the occasion of African Continental Virtual Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba. Comrade Fernando Gonzalez, President of Cuban Institute of Friendship with People, dear friends of Cuba in Africa and beyond. It is an honor and privilege for me to give a solidarity message in this very important meeting where all African country friends of Cuba reiterate their support and solidarity with our friends, the Cuban people. The relationship of Cuba and people of Africa, and that of Namibia in particular, started in 1960 at a historic UN General Assembly where the Commandant in Chief Fidel Castro Ruz gave a long speech showing his sympathy to the African liberation movement. This relationship grows throughout the hard time of Namibia fighting for independence and self-determination. This was the time Cuba was put under barbaric economic embargo and the start of the second unending struggle against the blockade. The struggle of Cuba has inspired millions of oppressed people throughout the world to stand up for their freedom. Many countries in Africa attained their freedom, and we now vow to fight shoulder to shoulder with you as you shared the trenches and fought with us for our independence. Hence, Namibia-Cuba Friendship Association continue to condemn the barbaric act of terrorism attack on Cuba. We denounce in the strongest term the act of violence that are promoted and carried out by criminal elements against Cuba. We strongly denounce the disinformation and discrediting campaign articulated from Washington faced with this maneuver and the attempt to project an image of instability. We want the absolute and immediate end of U.S. blockade against Cuba. It is now more than 60 years under the obsolete policy. It is time to stop such injustices. The blockade violates human rights. It hinders access to medicine and commodity supply, mostly during this time when the world is fighting the deadly pandemic, the COVID-19. In times like this, solidarity must be intensified. We urge all our friends to stand together and call for the immediate lifting of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade of the United States, which is the main obstacle to the development and well-being of the Cuban people. Stop the blockade. It is a virus too. Lift the criminal economic blockade against Cuba now. Viva the friendship between Namibia, Cuba, and the entire Africa. In solidarity, we are all one. Thank you for me.
Hola y muy buenos días.
Hello and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to address you all, comrades from the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples. I want to greet all those attending this international meeting on Fidel's and Che's ideas. From the Republic of Mali, Fidel Guerra, who was the ambassador and a graduate in Cuba, and now in charge in the Foreign Office of promoting friendship and collaboration relations between Cuba and all African countries. I want to express my solidarity with the Cuban people that has given all to help the African continent to liberate from itself from apartheid and develop through human resources and through technical assistance and collaboration. An ideal that has been forged throughout the revolution since January 1st, 1959. My name is Abuya and I'm a student from Gambia. I just graduated from the Medical Science University in Cuba, a project that began for Latin American and Caribbean countries and was later expanded throughout the world, including the African continent. This shows the solidarity between Cuba and all the peoples of the world, particularly the African people. Cuba has always taken us into consideration with this internationalist and solidarity project. Cuba has never abandoned the African people. Like, for example, during the Ebola pandemic and now with the COVID-19 pandemic, Cuba has always supported us, particularly my country, Gambia. Cuba has trained doctors and sends professors and doctors to my country to help my people, and that shows Cuba's solidarity. And we will always be at Cuba's side, and Cuba will always be able to count with us. Long live Cuba and long live solidarity with Cuba.
La revolución no se lleva en los...
The revolution is not in a lip service. It should be carried in your heart to die for it. Revolution is dignity and truth. Comrades, former African graduates in Cuba and throughout the world, revolutionary greetings from the movement of solidarity with Cuba in Burkina Faso, the country of Thomas Sankara. Today we celebrate the 7th Intercontinental Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba, when once again we will raise our voices to express our support to the heroic Cuban people in the right to self-determination, to live in peace with the ideals and achievements of Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro Ruz, and to continue its path towards well-being. Cuba is an example of solidarity, independence, social justice, and bravery that any person that tries to destroy the Cuban Revolution by subversion, bacterial warfare, biological warfare, and financial and commercial and economic blockades, promoting a hostile policy towards this dear island. Despite the negative impact of the pandemic, the U.S. has maintained its criminal and unfair economic, financial, and commercial blockade against Cuba. Plus 243 additional measures implemented by the Biden and Trump administration, together with a misinformation campaign to discredit Cuba's achievement and the help Cuba provides, with the objective of bringing Cuba back to the capitalist system and to abandon its social project. We who have received education in Cuba, we know about the reality and virtues of Cuba. We are an achievement of a socialist revolution, a vivid example of Cuba's love for Africa. Valuable Cuban brothers died in Africa, fighting for Africa's independence. They provide solidarity, they save lives, they contribute to the education of our daughters and sons. So we have the duty of being consistent and to defend the legacy of Fidel Castro and our revolutionary founding fathers. That is why I urge all my brothers and sisters to have this event as a platform to back Cuba. Each solidarity movement should carry out actions to demand an end and lifting of the economic blockade of the United States against Cuba and the devolution of the illegally occupied Guantanamo base, to demand a cease of hostilities against Cuba. I propose that October should be a month of or a month to tribute all our brothers and sisters as well as our Cuban people. We pay tribute to the memory of Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro Ruz and Commander Che Guevara, symbols of international solidarity in the struggle for the independence of peoples. We also pay tribute to Thomas Sankara, the African Che, our founding father, in the 34th anniversary of its assassination in 1987 and 104th anniversary of the birthday of Oliver Tambo and of the physical disappearance of Camilo Cienfuegos. We want to celebrate also the War of Independence of Cuba and the War of Emancipation of many African countries. We pay homage to all the heroes throughout the world, and particularly of the African countries that fought for international solidarity. Comrades, graduates from Cuba, we will always appreciate Cuba. We follow Fidel's legacy. Long live international workers movement. Homeland or death, we shall overcome. With my revolutionary greetings for you, brothers and sisters. We thank the speakers for their messages. We recall or remind our friends that we must be brief and stick to the time allotted, that is 1.5 minutes. Now I give the floor to our dear Michael Lapsley.
No sé de
Hello. Dear Comrade Fernando, President of ECAP, dear comrades across the mother continent, we bring you all greetings from the Friends of Cuba Society in South Africa, mother city of Cape Town. Since the triumph of the revolution in 1959, you taught the world the meaning of solidarity. You taught us that solidarity is not about giving people the leftovers when you become rich, but sharing what you have, however little that may be. Recently, the Mexican president made the same point. As the Friends of Cuba Society, we have sought to emulate that lesson by soliciting financial donations for the purchase of food for the Cuban people. In our view, the actions of the Biden administration to attempt to strangle Cuba in the midst of a global pandemic is a crime against humanity. We appreciate the way Cuban health professionals wrote an open letter to President Biden challenging the lies and fake news being spread from Washington and Miami. From Cairo to Cape Town, we in Africa have benefited hugely from the practical solidarity of Cuba in countless ways, and the training and education of our young people in many different disciplines, especially medicine. Just a few days ago, I was standing at the Wall of Remembrance at Freedom Park in Pretoria, which commemorates all those who sacrificed their lives to end apartheid and colonialism in Southern Africa. There for all of us to see are the names of 2,107 Cubans who made the supreme sacrifice to free us. We will not forget, and we know that we carry an eternal debt of gratitude for what you have done for us. Just like what happened with the outbreak of Ebola in the face of COVID-19, we have benefited from the assistance of the Henry Reed Brigade. As does our government, we are 100% in favor of the nomination of the Henry Reed Brigade to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. We are encouraged by the recent announcement of a deal between Cuba and Vietnam to supply vaccines. In the face of the humanitarian crisis facing Cuba, we urge the African Union, all member states, and multilateral institutions like the BRICS Bank to come to the aid of Cuba in its hour of need. Cuba can play a critical role in vaccinating the whole continent. We as solidarity organizations should help popularize Cuban vaccines and encourage our governments to purchase them. The time for practical solidarity with Cuba is now. Venceremos. I thank you.
Muchas gracias, Father Michael. Un abrazo.
We thank Michael Fraternal greetings to our friends in Guinea-Bissau. We give the floor to Imani Naumoya, member of the Secretariat of the Central Committee of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. Imani, you have the floor.
Revolutionary greetings, comrades. Our revolutionary greetings to Comrade President Miguel Diaz-Canel, President of Cuba. Our revolutionary greetings to our brother and comrade Fernando Gonzalez Lort, a living hero of the Cuban Five anti-terrorists. President of the Cuban Institute for the Friendship of the Peoples of the World, and son of our eternal mother, Malaji. To our revolutionary greetings to our brother and comrade, Victor Drake. Known here in Guinea-Bissau in the homeland of Amilcar Cabral as Comandante Moya, a living hero who participated not only in the armed struggle of Cuba and Congo with Che Guevara, but was also the leader of the Cuban Internationalist Brigade during the glorious armed struggle of Guinea-Bissau with Amilcar Cabral. And to our comrade president and all the comrades specialists of ICAP, to the mass organizations of the Communist Party of Cuba, the combatants of the PIDC, the African Party of Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, its veterans, its leaders, its responsibles, the women of our party called the Democratic Union of Guinean Women, UDIMU, the Amilcar Cabral African Youth JAC, the council of our technical and cadres called CONQUASA, all send their revolutionary greetings to you, along with the ambassador of Cuba to Guinea-Bissau, our brother and comrade, Dr. Raul de la Pena. To our comrade delegates of all the African countries assembled here today, as well as the participants watching via Facebook and YouTube, and our comrade interpreters, English, Portuguese, Russian, and we're honored to be in the house of Amilcar Cabral here, the PIDC National Headquarters, in the homeland of Amilcar Cabral, Guinea-Bissau, as yet another testimony and reconfirmation of what the Communist Party of Cuba exhibits. The party is the guarantee of the revolution. Our president, brother and comrade, Engineer Domingo Simões Pereira, a continuer of the works of Amilcar Cabral, sends his heartfelt revolutionary greetings and appreciation to you, comrades. Today, our party, PIDC, is in mourning. Many of our comrades were here early today, but have left to go to the funeral ceremony of our eternal commandant, Comrade Geraldo da Silva. His immortal remains just left his PIDC headquarters to be buried in the cemetery. And many of our comrades have accompanied him. Some were here earlier, some left. They asked us to stay behind to represent our party. The worst crime in the world is ungratefulness. The worst crime you can commit in the world is to be ungrateful. We, on the contrary, will forever increase our solidarity with Cuba, our solidarity with all struggling peoples in the world. Our internal guide, Amilcar Cabral, teaches us in his thesis called The National Liberation of Culture that one of the main objectives of cultural resistance is, quote unquote, constant generalized increase of sentiments of humanism and solidarity, respect and altruistic dedication for humans. What joins us to the Cuban Revolution with the African Revolution is just this, the constant generalized increase of sentiments of humanism and solidarity. These sentiments of humanism and solidarity are guided by what the Cuban Revolution did when they sent Comandante and Brother Che Guevara to Algeria, here in Africa, to establish a high command for all the liberation movements in Latin America. Not only were the armed militants trained politically, militarily on African soil, but as well as the arms and equipment was shipped from Africa to Latin America as an altruistic dedication for humans, to rid humanity of rotten imperialism that's causing so much suffering to humans. These sentiments of humanism and solidarity are what guided the Cuban Revolution to send brother and comrade Victor Drake with the Brigade of Internationalists from Cuba to here, Guinea-Bissau, to Congo to work with Che Guevara, to continue the process that Patrice Lumumba participated in, until the imperialists and their neo-colonialist puppets assassinated him. From there, these sentiments of humanism and solidarity are what guided the Cuban Revolution when the historic meeting between Che Guevara and Amilcar Cabral took place in Conakry in 1965. As a result of this meeting, Cuba sent military trainers, doctors, health professionals, and assisted the African Party of Independence of Guinea Cape Verde, PIDC, in its glorious armed struggle. Our children went to Cuba only with their bags, but they returned as trained cadres, as doctors, nurses, lab technicians, teachers, agriculture, and engineers agronomic, sports and physical education specialists, among other professionals. More than 3,000 of our children have reproduced what they learned in Cuba to generations that we cannot count here in Guinea-Bissau. Not to mention the higher level of culture and self-esteem of the Guinean youth who are now doctors and medical workers, who are professionals. They too are passing on to others that which was passed on to them. Hundreds of young Cubans left their patria of Jose Marti, said goodbye to their biological families, left the homeland of Jose Martinez International to come here to Guinea-Bissau, the homeland of Amilcar Cabral, to serve as teachers, doctors, and medical technicians. They're still here. Through the good times, the bad times, the ugly, through the coup d'etats, through all the imperialist intrigues. Even those who are speaking here today, we are our life to the health, our life and health to the Cuban professionals. This is revolution. Revolution produces scientists, and as Fidel Castro reminds us, the future of Cuba, of Guinea-Bissau, of Africa, and humanity belongs to scientists. Our comrade and sister Anna Morales, the partner of brother and comrade Victor Drake, served as the founder of our medical school here in 1986. Since then, hundreds of doctors have been trained to save thousands of lives and improve the health of our people. The Cuban and African revolutions show that ideology doesn't have frontiers. These sentiments of humanism and solidarity are what guided the Cuban Revolution to send Henry Reed's brigades to Africa, to here in Guinea-Bissau, to Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean islands to fight against Ebola and coronavirus COVID-19. Wherever there are catastrophes in the world, two tsunamis, hurricanes, earthquakes, you'll find Cuban internationalists there. Cuba doesn't have gold mines. It doesn't have abundance of minerals. Its greatness, its wealth, its richness, it's its people faithful to the socialist principles organized by the Communist Party of Cuba. Even when Cuba receives less, like during this coronavirus pandemic, during COVID, it still pays for the health care of its people. So as we close, we encourage comrades who are participating today through the social media to study Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, but go further on, study Victor Drake, study George Risket, study Maria del Carmen, study the Cuban Revolution, and study the African Revolution. Study Kwame Nkrumah, study Amilcar Cabral, Ahmed Sékou Touré. Study the role of the 300,000 children of the Cuban Revolution who gave their sacrifices to Angola. 3,000 of them fertilized the soil. Study them. Contribute to the victory of the MPLA, the Popular Movement for Liberation in Angola, as well as the independence of Namibia and an end to apartheid in South Africa. And as you study them, put their positive values into practice and correct errors. Victor Drake, for us, Commandante, who's here with us today, is an example that we should copy. We want our youth to copy. A dignified citizen of Cuba and a citizen of Guinea-Bissau, of Africa, whose homeland is humanity. We want you to know that Che Guevara is more popular here in Guinea-Bissau than any other musician in the world. Che Guevara. The Cuban Revolution is intertwined with the African Revolution and the worldwide socialist revolution. If you're faithful to the Cuban Revolution, wherever you are in the world, you will have prestige and contacts throughout the world. To do what? To make revolution. The job of revolutionaries is to make revolution. For every youth that's become transformed or will become transformed into a humble, honest revolutionary, there will be an equal number of those who are in solidarity with Cuba. Every true Pan-Africanist revolutionary constantly increases its sentiments of humanism and solidarity. If you're faithful to the Pan-Africanist revolution, you will ever increase your active solidarity with Cuba. As Fidel Castro reminds us, a better world is possible. And we bet our life on that. We wish to remind delegates here today that the last conference in Nigeria in 2019, that the final resolution stated that the Solidarity Conference of Africa and Cuba in 2023 will take place here in the homeland of Amilcar Cabral, Guinea-Bissau. We want you to come here to witness our ever-increasing sentiments of humanism and solidarity. Viva Revolution Cubana! Viva the Pan-Africanist Revolution! Viva the Worldwide Revolution! Viva Cuban Revolution! Viva solidarity with the Cuban Revolution! And to our enemies who say you'll find your graves in Africa, you'll find your graves in Cuba. Abajo to placate against Cuba. Abajo with imperialism. The struggle continues. I look to Continental. Victory is certain. Victoria is certain. Until final victory, we shall win. Hasta la victoria siempre. Venceremos. Thank you, comrade.
Querido amigo, muchas
Thank you, dear friends, for your words. Here we regret the death of the passing of Commander Dan Silva. Our condolences to our friends in Guinea-Bissau. We have to adjust to the time frame because of the time we have devoted to this conference. Now I would like to give the floor to our comrade from MPLA from Angola, Macento Sebastião Lopez, member of the Central Committee of the Movement for the Liberation of Angola, and Fernando Jaime, Secretary General of the Friendship Association Angola, Cuba. Please, I would like you to take 1.5 minutes to make your presentation because we're running out of time. Please, our friends from the MPLA, if you could turn your camera on, please, so that we can see you.
nuestros amigos desde Angola.
Our friends from Angola. Good evening to you, my friends. Please, you have the floor. I'm sorry, the speaker is not being heard.
Amigo Fernando Jaime, active el micrófono, por favor.
Please turn your microphone on as well because we cannot hear you. The microphone on the screen.
El micrófono de la aplicación.
I'm talking about not the microphone that you have your table, but I'm talking about the microphone on the computer. On the screen of the computer, you have to turn the microphone on. We cannot hear you.
¿Sí? ¿Te dices? Sí, nuestro amigo. Seguimos sin escuchar.
My friend, we cannot hear you. Still, we cannot hear you.
Amigo, no lo escuchamos. Vamos a pasar la palabra en tanto ustedes resuelven ese problema técnico, porque no los escuchamos.
Sorry, we're going to move on, my friend, because we still cannot hear you. How about Seychelles? You have, for example, Patrick Jimenez, the leader of the United Party from Seychelles. You could please take the floor at this time.
Greetings to all comrades all the way from the Republic of Seychelles. This virtual meeting during a month of symbolism of international solidarity in the struggle for independence for both Cuba and Africa. We are here reminded of the great Cuban revolutionary El Comandante Fidel Castro and the role he played in putting an end to apartheid in South Africa. We further pay tribute to the greatest internationalist of our time, Dr. Ernesto Che Guevara. During its years as a party in government in Seychelles, my party, the United Seychelles, has never faltered in joining the rest of the world to condemn for the past 28 years the largest economic aggression in human history. That is the blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba. This is a violation of human rights that has no precedent in contemporary history. May I take this opportunity to thank the Cuban people for their continued support to Africa in general and Seychelles in particular. It is my sincere hope that this meeting brings about some fruitful discussions, new initiatives, and above all, results in closer collaboration and solidarity amongst us. Long live Cuba. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a nuestros amigos de Seychelles.
Thank our friend from Seychelles. Our friend from the MPLA, you can take the floor at this point in time. Come on, friends, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Nuestros amigos de Angola.
Our friends from Angola, if you could please turn your microphone on.
Por favor, activen el audio, no se escucha.
Our friends from the MPLA, we still cannot hear you.
Sí, bueno, nuestros amigos de Angola estaremos entonces.
Well, to our friends from Angola, we will be waiting for you until you solve that technical problem, and then we will give you the floor when we have now a message from Zimbabwe.
Front ZANU-PF, it is my honor and privilege to participate in this virtual African continent event of solidarity with Cuba, hosted by the Institute of Friendship with Peoples, to strengthen the bond of friendship between our two parties, our two countries, our two peoples. For over 6 decades, mutual trust and support has been the trademark of the relations between the Cuban Communist Party and the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front, ZANU-PF, especially in these trying times and challenging times caused by this deadly COVID-19 pandemic. ZANU-PF and the Cuban Communist Party share historical ties that date back to Zimbabwe's struggle for independence in the 1970s and eventual independence in 1980. Since Zimbabwe's independence, Cuba has remained and continues to be a most reliable ally in our development. Cuba's contribution to our education and health sectors has been absolutely phenomenal. The people of Zimbabwe shall remain forever grateful to the revolutionary Cuban brothers and sisters. Let us therefore look forward to pursuing other areas of cooperation, such as in tourism and in sport, as soon as we win the current battle with the coronavirus pandemic. ZANU-PF is pleased that the Institute of Friendship with Peoples has decided to hold this event in the month of October, a month full of symbolism in the history of Cuba and the African continent.
Le demos la palabra al gran amigo.
I would like to give the floor to the great friend of Cuba, the president of the Friendship Association of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Cuba, and Secretary General of the Congolese Partners Party. You have the floor. Good evening, actually, to you.
Okay.
We can hear you. Go ahead. Good evening. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Les amis de l'ICAP et les amis de Cuba à travers l'Afrique, recevez nos du Congo, patrie de Patrice Emery.
Now, I would like to convey greetings from the country of Lumumba. We are in the 7th Forum of Solidarity with Cuba. Number 7 means faith, because the week has 7 days. We celebrate this 7th forum on this day, the 7th. The alliance between Cuba and Africa is alliance sealed with blood. We're talking about sons and daughters from Africa that were deported by imperialism, and they wanted to keep them in the Americas. The Cuban blood is actually African blood as well. Secondly, we must also take into account that Cuban blood was shed in the liberation of several African countries. We talk about countries like Angola, about the true independence of Angola, Namibia, and the remaining African countries that was attained thanks to the Cuban blood shed for the liberation of these countries, and also thanks to the decolonization of Africa. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the common land of Patrice Lumumba, when our leader was murdered in Lomé, Che Guevara condemned Lumumba's assassination. He invited all free countries in the world to come and revenge Lumumba's blood. In 1965, Commander Fidel Castro authorized Cubans including Che Guevara, to come here to fight, hand in hand with Kabila. And what Cuba did on the 17th of May 1967, Desiree Kabila was able to expel the imperialism thanks to all the experience, all the learning that the fighters of Congo received from Cuban fighters. Today, we are able to stand in the face of imperialism thanks to the teachings and our contacts with Cuban guerrilla fighters. Today, Africa is solid, and we can face imperialism and some unworthy sons of Africa have been leading some African states, and some countries have been following the orders of the United States and the European Union. We, just like Cuba, endure the same situation. Our revolutionary duty is to stand in solidarity with Cuba, because what happens in Cuba is also happening in our country, in Africa, and we witness this every single day. Solidarity with Cuba is not negotiable. Solidarity with Cuba cannot be bought. This is a solidarity sealed with blood, that the dignified sons of Africa should have to die with Cuba, eat with Cuba, and they have to share the well-being with Cuba forever, because in Quito Carnival we saw how the blood was shed, the blood of Cubans was shed, and the Cuban guerrilla fighters did not get back home with the gold of Angola as the imperialists did. They got back home with the remains of the sons and daughters who died in the fight in solidarity with us. We share in Africa, specifically in Congo, we shared solidarity. And we shall always fight against the blockade, because the blockade is more than COVID-19. If imperialism is afraid of COVID-19, well, the U.S. imperialism should uplift the blockade against Cuba, because this is a virus that destroys the Cuban economy, the Cuban people, and we cannot remain with our arms crossed in this regard. Words are not enough. We require concrete actions so that we can stand in solidarity with Cuba, we can voice our solidarity with Cuba. And we believe that imperialism is not afraid of weapons, because they're the ones who manufacture the weapons. They're afraid of the awareness of the peoples. We have been mobilizing ourselves for the liberation of the Cuban Five, who were unfairly condemned by the United States, by the U.S. justice, and by the government that in the long run released the Cuban Five. We have to mobilize ourselves with concrete actions. It is important for the end of the blockade. We should commit ourselves of Africans. We should wage this legal battle. But as I say, to undertake actions with our lawyers in the face of the human rights authorities to request that the U.S. is actually sentenced as a result of these criminal endeavors, as it is the maintenance of the blockade, is part of the fact. The National Assembly of the United Nations, with 99% of it has been voting against the blockade, and the United States still unfairly maintains this. We have to undertake concrete actions, legal actions, and it has to be undertaken by all African countries. We have to launch also a media campaign so that awareness raising is taken into account against U.S. imperialism. When we launched this solidarity campaign, the Cuban Five were released. In this seventh forum, we should issue a concrete resolution so that each country may wage this legal battle, this media campaign, but also the political battle, so that our deputies, the Solidarity Association in Parliament, so that they can also contact the U.S. Congress to condemn this aggression. This is an aggression against a people that is unfair. This Cuban people is fair, stands solidarity. He loves the happiness of other peoples, and they share the little things they have with other world countries. Fidel Castro. I mean, we have to exert a political measure, diplomatic pressure, so that the United States of America, in these criminal attempts, they may lift this blockade. We, at the United Nations General Assembly, we fight this blockade, but we, as a people, we can do away with these imperialist actions. These are our forces, and this is the proposals that we have in this 7th Solidarity Conference. The world is mobilizing also when it comes to vaccination. Cubans have assisted even Europe in the battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. But we Africans have to have also the choice of the Cuban vaccine, especially in our country, in Congo, so that we can show the United States how this blockade is harming Cuba, but still Cuba is willing to offer its vaccines by saying that we want to salute the initiative of ECAP. Likewise, I would like to pay tribute to our commander Fidel Castro, our symbol of endurance. I would like to pay tribute to all the Cuban sons and daughters who died in the liberation of Africa. Also, I would like to pay tribute to the Communist Party of Cuba that accepted to participate in the decolonization of Africa. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias a nuestro amigo Silverio Bosua.
Thank you.
Nuestros amigos.
Thank you to our friends from Angola. You can take the floor now. Our friends from Angola, please, you can take the floor.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Yes, thank you. Welcome. We love Cuba, beautiful Cuba. Solidarity Cuba. Dr. Fernando González. hero of Cuba, president of ECAP. We are highly honored to take the floor on behalf of the Association of Friendship Angola Cuba to reaffirm our everlasting solidarity. At this point in time, we would be in Mozambique in the 7th meeting of solidarity with Cuba. Angola was, is, and shall be on a permanent basis a country that is a friend of Cuba. And with this logic behind, in 1995, we hosted the first meeting of solidarity with Cuba that took place in South Africa. In 1997, we were in Ghana as well. Angola had the privilege in 2010 to host the third meeting of solidarity with Cuba. In 2012, we also attended the meeting in Ethiopia. In 2017, we were in Libya in the fifth meeting. Finally, in 2019, we were in Abuja in Nigeria. And this was a logic sequence that started in 1994 with the first World Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba. And Angola, that was also invited, we had a key role there. Later, we went to Cuba in the second World Solidarity meeting with Cuba. Our friend Cuba. Cuba has been harassed. We Angolans are together. But we identify ourselves with that meeting. We are here once again to condemn the commercial, financial, economic blockade that is still in place for over 50 years. Also, we ask for the return of the Guantanamo naval base. We are a country, we're a sister nation of Cuba. And our alliance, our friendship was sealed in the theater of operation during the war. And we have to say that Cuban and Angolan blood was shed in the defense of our homeland. We have bear witness to the friendship, and that started in '65. Commander Che Guevara went to Congo, Brazzaville, and President Neto requested through Commander Che Guevara to send 3 structures to train the emerging Angolan army. Commander Fidel Castro, in response, instead of 3, sent 6 fighters, including General Rafael Limonta. Cuba. Here we are, once again, to stand in eternal solidarity, and our sacred acknowledgement and our slogan is Cuba yesterday, Cuba today, Cuba forever. This is our conviction. We do not forget the historical background Long live Fidel. Long live Fidel. Homeland or death, we shall prevail. Thank you.
Angola G! Imperial G!
Muchísimas gracias a nuestros queridos amigos.
We thank our dear friends. We thank you for your long-standing solidarity. Messages that you have shared with us today are proof of the strong links be among us. I would like to greet friends that join us from various countries, from Canada, Serbia, London, Nicaragua, the Embassy of Venezuela and Nigeria, and other groups of solidarity with Cuba from Europe. After listening to the comments by dear friends, we reiterate that you may send your messages and questions and comments through our Facebook page. We are coming close to the closing session of our conference, and I call on Chris Maclaco, Secretary General of the National Executive of Focus and member of the Politburo of the Communist Party of South Africa. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the leadership of distinguished guests, comrades and friends. We're meeting at the 7th African Continental Meeting of Solidarity. In this manner, due to a host of factors, not least the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, its impact on the world population, global socio-economic situation, and on critical health infrastructure at a critical moment in time in history. The 7th edition of the African Continental Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba is both timely and duty-bound to act on expressed and historic solidarity with Cuba, its people and revolution. Whilst the world, and indeed the continent, grapples with the tragic consequences of an impact of the pandemic on their people and societies, there have been developments which have continued to make our world a dangerous place for humanity. US imperialism and its allies are continuing to threaten the People's Republic of China and supporting coup operations on the African continent. In Latin America, US imperialism continues with its attempts to strangulate the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The illegal and unilateral financial and economic blockade against Cuba. The United States' ongoing illegal and unilateral economic financial blockade against Cuba has been intensified, including renewed efforts being made towards regime change through inciting instability in Cuba. The Biden administration has strengthened the measures Trump instituted with the view of overthrowing the government of the Cuban Communist Party. Biden has embarked on a path of seeking to overthrow those whom US imperialism cast as threats to their national interest. This despite his electoral rhetoric and promises of restoring Cuba relations. Whereas Obama's policies that granted Americans unrestricted rights to visit family and send money to Cuba were reversed by Trump. And now Biden is tightening these measures beyond comprehension as he looks towards the 2022 elections in Florida, home of a large population of Cuban Americans who leaned towards Trump in that elections. These measures, together with the coronavirus, have had a huge impact on Cuba. By strengthening and tightening the financial and banking institutions on Cuba, has severely constrained Cuba's overall capacities. However, despite these measures, Cuba demonstrated its resilience and tenacity. The 11 million Cubans who have suffered from 6 decades-long illegal U.S. blockade, the grip of Trump's 243 additional coercive measures, continue to fight off the twin problems of COVID-19 and a debt crisis with their characteristic determination and resolve. Cuba recently scored a groundbreaking diplomatic victory at the United Nations in June, as a growing sentiment began to spread across the world. U.S. imperialism and Zionist Israel will finally come to the realization that maintaining this outdated stance against 184 nations unequivocally opposed to them indeed, both is a losing battle and an embarrassing battle. Cuba has, in the midst of the pandemic, developed candidate vaccines for the coronavirus, and this bears testimony to its advanced biotechnological capacities. To this end, we think we must continue to wage a relentless struggle on the continent to continue to support the international campaign to make vaccines public goods. And this includes those candidate vaccines produced by Cuba, China, Russia, and others, so that these become accessible to all, not only in the clutches of big pharma, whose only interest is profit. The Continental Social Research Institute said the following recently: information about the numbers of vaccines sold and transported to different parts of the world changes rapidly. Nonetheless, it is now acknowledged that many poorer nations will not have vaccines for their citizens before 2023, while the global north has secured more vaccines than they require, enough to vaccinate their populations more than 3 or 5 times. Canada, for instance, has enough vaccines to vaccinate its citizens 5 times. The global north, with less than 14% of the population, has secured more than half the total anticipated vaccines. It is indeed vaccine hoarding, vaccine nationalism. Today, more than ever before, and the Cuban people need our concrete solidarity. The African continent, which is going through its own crises, owes a huge debt to Cuba. The ties and bonds of brotherly sisterly relations runs through the veins of these people. Indeed, from the moment Kwame and Gamal Nasser pledged their solidarity for the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, Africans considered this a historic sport in the Americas and part of the anti-colonialism legacy, and a pantheon that led to almost 37 African nations gaining independence from colonial powers between 1957 and 1960. Cuba and Commander Fidel Castro underlined this at the Dublin Conference Against Racism that was held 20 years ago in South Africa. Those of us who uphold values and virtues of progressiveness, and solidarity, have a duty to take this opportunity to demonstrate this and register our support with Cuba and other struggles across the world of the Palestinians, the peoples of Western Sahara, Syria, Nicaragua, Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and other peoples across the world. Comrades and friends, in the last period, we have seen a development that is very disturbing. Instead of providing a dubious observer status to Zionist Israel and the African Union, we want to propose our leaders on the continent should rather give that honor to Cuba, which has distinguished itself in many ways to be a true and genuine ally of the continent and its people. The AU, which has voted with the rest of the progressive peoples of the world at the United Nations against the US blockade, has the opportunity to redeem itself and do the right thing. Just because Cuba has not shown interest in the matter, it's not that we should not look at this important moment and special honor to a country and people who have historic ties with the continent, where people of the African descent were shaped and contributed towards the current Cuban national outlook and population, the mulata. Cuba's military and political humanitarian support to the continent are legendary and too long a list, but it speaks for itself, and we exalt it as an example of human development. The almost 4,000 medical professionals functioning all over the African soil, military personnel whose blood swelled the lands of Angola, military advisors to Polisario, training almost 3,000 Zimbabwean teachers from 1986 to 1996, helping vaccinate almost 2 million Bakinabi children during the reign of Thomas Sankara, decorated medical service throughout the Caribbean, and finally Africans on the continent and elsewhere, including in the US, have benefited from studying at the Latin American School of Medical Sciences in Cuba. Indeed, Cuba is not alone. Venceremos. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank our comrade for his words, and I would like to invite Joel Queipo Ruiz, members of the Secretariat of the Central Committee of the PCC and head of the Economic Department, for the closing remarks of this virtual conference. Dear sisters and brothers from Africa, for me it is a great honor to share this meeting with the legendary Victor Dreke, Commander Moya, and with three heroes of the Republic of Cuba, who are symbol of patriotism and the endurance of our historic people, and also with personalities from the cultural sector, sports, who have attended these sessions of young students coming from the African continent. With great pleasure, I would like to convey warm greetings, our deep appreciation for putting aside a space on your agenda to participate in this continental African online meeting of solidarity with Cuba. Hosting this conference virtually has great importance as part of the efforts to continue the solidarity work and also cooperation among our peoples in the face of the challenges imposed by COVID-19. We have been joined by many historical friends of Cuba and the representation of figures of culture, as I said, and African youth who are studying our country so that in the future they can help their peoples with their knowledge. This conference became an excellent space to further strengthen the bonds among our parties, associations, and organizations to continue strengthening joint cooperation and honoring the legacy of our historical leaders. It has been very pleasant to listen to your heartfelt messages of unchanging support and solidarity, as well as the proposal that you made. These are vivid proofs of the close cultural, historic, and bonds of sisterhood that unite the peoples of Africa and Cuba. Our first secretary of the Central Committee of the PCC and President of the Republic of Cuba, Comrade Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez, reaffirmed this in the closing speech during the 8th Congress of the PCC, and he said, "We maintain our cooperation and solidarity with the countries of Africa, continent to which we are attached by strong bonds of history, culture, and sisterhood." And of course, I would like to thank the unanimous support from the African continent to the main fighting causes of our people, especially our call for the immediate lifting of the unfair economic, commercial, and financial blockade that is maintained by the United government against Cuba. This genocidal policy was further strengthened with 243 measures adopted by Donald Trump administration that are still valid during the Joe Biden administration, and instead of being softened, they have been further strengthened in an opportunistic attempt to affect us during the current health crisis. The victories attained by Cuba in the United Nations in the resolution against the blockade and the approval of 12 summits of the African Union of resolution of condemn to this criminal policy show that Cuba is not alone. It counts on the acknowledgement and respect of the majority of states, especially of the African peoples. During this conference, we wanted to give an update of the intense agenda taken forward by our government, as was presented by the Vice Minister and the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, comply with the ideas, concepts, and guidelines of the 8th Congress of the Communist Party of Cuba that would enable us, in the midst of the brutal economic war launched by the U.S. government, to foster the production of food products, strengthen state-owned and socialist companies and its relation with the new economic actors that are not state-owned, promote saving and foster foreign investment. In this regard, it will be a great achievement if African entrepreneurs could join us in the economic development of our country. You have been able to see that as the result of the legacy of the historical leader of the Cuban Revolution, Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro Ruz, that many of you have referred to him, in the development of science and biotechnology, Cuba has managed to be the first country in Latin America and the Caribbean with 3 vaccines of its own that are highly proven efficiency that will make it possible that before the end of the year we shall be able to vaccinate almost the entire Cuban population. Coupled with this, our health personnel has developed an outstanding work of solidarity, of support to other nations in the tackling of COVID-19, and we have shown our willingness to cooperate with other nations with the supply and technological transfer for the production of vaccines. Today, we have paid heartfelt tribute to the emancipating ideas, anti-imperialist and internationalist ideas of Fidel, Raúl, and Che Guevara, who, together with the founding fathers and anti-independence heroes from Africa forged this everlasting sisterhood between the peoples of Cuba and Africa that we have the great honor and commitment to maintain and strengthen. You can be rest assured that this conference has been a success, taking into account the high number of participants, the excellent talks full of solidarity, commitment, and initiative to give continuity to the common purpose of reaching a fairer and solidarity world without exclusion, without unilateral policies of sanctions, respecting life, the environment, peace, and the development of our nations. It has been a great tribute to the guerrilla fighter Ernesto Che Guevara in the 54th anniversary of his death in combat, who talked to us about the idea that other peoples in the world are claiming for our best efforts. Also, with the development of this meeting, we pay tribute to our African ancestors that under conditions of slavery were detached from their homelands and forced by the colonialists and were able to rise up with carrying machetes together with Cuban independentists and started 153 years ago the war for the liberation of Cuba. This is the most sacred tribute to our internationalist fighters who fought for the independence of many African peoples. Over 2,000 of them gave their valuable lives, fulfilling the sacred duty that to be internationalists is to pay our own debt with humanity. As Fidel taught us that did so much for independence, development, and the well-being of the sister nations in Africa, including the education of thousands of children who studied and were trained in Cuba. I would like to thank you all for your presence, and we would like to reaffirm together, long live the peoples of Cuba and Africa, long live the friendship between Cuba and Africa. As Che Guevara said, ever onwards to victory, we shall prevail.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, dear friends. We would like to reiterate our appreciation to maintain your solidarity commitment with Cuba and its revolution. Also, I would like to thank all those who made possible the hosting of this event. And of course, we could not end this conference without the musical legacy. I would like to show you a video of the young singer Teresa Llaner. Let's enjoy the video.
Y mi voz resuena bajo la luna llena. Canto yo, siento en este cantar. Amora, Ibae, Benny Moré, Ibae, Celeste Mendoza, Ibae, Mayra Caridad Valdés, Ibae, Carlos Embale, Ibae, Omoyemi, Ibae, Oshaile, Ibae, Opa Keyesi.